Welcome into Sports Memo's podcast, UFC Fight Night 170. We got Clint on from at Diehard MMA Pod, a expert handicapper in UFC. So hopefully find some winners on tomorrow's UFC card here, Clint. As you take center stage in terms of MMA, welcome into the pod. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good, Drew. Thank you very much for that awesome intro. I'm pretty excited, MMA is pretty much the only legitimate sport still standing right now, so it's our time to shine, I guess.
Absolutely, man. I mean, taking center stage. I'm telling you, the NBA going down, college basketball, March Madness. Couldn't believe that they did that. Sure enough, it's UFC probably in the 1 seed, and in Mexican La Liga soccer in the 2 in terms of North American sports, man.
Yeah, and I think Bovada's got like virtual camel racing or something like that if you're really dying to scratch that itch. But we're all guns blazing over here for UFC. Bellator actually canceled their Friday night event as well, so it's just going to be UFC for the foreseeable future. So good time for me.
All right, man. Well, yeah, Clint taking center stage here. It's Clint Maclean from Phoenix, Arizona here, guys. And on Twitter, at Diehard MMA Pod. He does a weekly podcast on Tuesday nights, always published by Wednesday. So check it out if you're a UFC fan, giving out picks, suggestions there. So check it out. And we got 5 fights we're going to be breaking down on this video. So hopefully find a bunch of winners. Got a best bet too. Really 5 best bets, I believe. But either way, let's get right into it. We got top of the card here, and it's an early start, Clint. We got, first off, guys, it's moving from ESPN Plus to ESPN due to a lot of just taking center stage like we're talking about. Also going to noon Pacific. That's all correct, Clint, right?
Yeah, that is correct. That's correct. I think the concerns with the coronavirus is that they're going to move forward with this thing, but they just want to get it done and then get out of Dodge. So they're moving it up 2-3 hours. We're going to have a nice early start time, which is fun for me. I always like waking up with fights in the morning, something to bet on. Don't have to wait until, 3-4 p.m. at night to get started. So we're going to get started early, and I love it. We actually have a bet on the very first fight of the night.
Absolutely, man. UFC Fight Night 170, ESPN noon Pacific start here. And I believe we got a pick on the first fight and 3 on the undercard. So I'll let you have it, Clint.
That's right. I felt like the value mostly is going to be on the undercard this week. The main card lines are pretty tight, but don't worry. We've got something for you for the main event. The first fight of the night, we've got Veronica Macedo taking on Malecki, I believe is the way you pronounce that. Sorry, I'm struggling with the last names here.
It's a Brazilian card. That happens, man.
Exactly. So the very first fight of the night, we're just looking for action. We're going to bet on violence. We're going to go under 2.5 at plus 100. It actually looks like that line move may have gone a bit against me, and there's plus 115 out there. So if you're getting the video version of this later on, you're going to get a slightly better line than me. You don't normally want to bet on unders in women's fights that they don't go to the distance. A lot of them tend to go to decision. But what we have here is a striker versus grappler match where we've got Bay making her UFC debut, and she is massive for the division. She's cutting down. She used to fight at 155, I want to say, and she's got a lot of amateur Muay Thai experience, lots of power. She's 3-0 as a pro in MMA. All 3 of those are by finish. Then on the flip side of this thing, you've got Veronica Macedo. She's a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and she should be fighting a weight class down. So she's taking a short notice fight, a weight class up. She's got experience on her side, but both these girls are finishers. Both these girls go for the kill, and I see this thing ending one of 2 ways, Drew. I think that Veronica Macedo is either going to get the fight to the mat where she has a massive, massive edge, and she wins this thing by submission because Bay is just going to be a fish out of water, or because of the size difference, the height and reach difference, Veronica Macedo is going to get bullied. She's going to get pushed around, and when she gets a little bit tired, this is a woman who will be able to crack her right on the jaw, and there's such a size difference here that Bay actually has a full-on 10-inch reach advantage. That's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So I don't think this thing goes to the final bell, and getting even money or plus money on it, I love it.
In Clint, just a follow up to that, you got Bay as a 10-inch reach advantage, and just sidewise speaking here, she's a pretty decent underdog. You don't normally see that in MMA. Is that surprising to you?
I mean, you do see it simply because she's unknown. She's the underdog here because she's 3-0 as a pro. She's going to make dumb mistakes that a more seasoned veteran fighter isn't going to make. And Veronica Macedo is a household name. We've seen the kind of damage that she can put out. She's had a bit of a rough run in the UFC, but when she clicks, when she's on, she's absolutely deadly. So I think that, Bay, if you're looking for a side, it's definitely dog or pass. I wouldn't lay this kind of a price on Veronica Macedo, even though she is the more well-rounded fighter. Size eventually makes a difference when it comes to fighting, and that's exactly what we're seeing here.
Okay, Clint. So for record-keeping purposes, you're on the under 2.5 at a plus price, right?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. And we got 2 more on the undercard, so how about those, Clint?
So our next fight is going to be a parlay, actually. We're going to do 2 fights back-to-back here. I have got Enrique Barzola and Gilbert Burns. So both these guys are short favorites. When I locked the parlay up, it paid about plus 135, and both the lines have kind of moved. One's gotten a little steeper. The other one's gotten a little better. So it's probably right around the same ballpark if you hit it now, but you might get plus 140 or something on that. So Enrique Barzola is dropping a weight class. He's taking on Rani Yahya. Now, Rani Yahya, he's been in the UFC forever. He's 35 years old, and I just think he's coming to the end of his career. He's a wizard on the mat when it comes to jiu-jitsu, but Enrique Barzola is one of the strongest fighters from 145, and now he, just due to his size, is cutting down to 135. When you see these high-level Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys, the one thing that stops them in fights is high-level wrestling. Barzola is going to be strong. He's going to be powerful. He'll know how to stay out of trouble when this thing hits the mat, and that essentially eliminates what Rani Yahya is going to have as a path to victory. So I like Barzola in that spot, and it's kind of crazy because it's a very similar angle on Gilbert Burns. He's taking on Demian Maia, who's a household name in the UFC and in Brazil especially. He's a hometown hero. There's no hometown advantage here, though, because Burns himself is a high-level Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. He's Brazilian also. So that's one thing. It's nice. We don't have to worry about a judge's robbery or something like that for the hometown guy. Gilbert Burns, since he moved up to 170 from 155, has been an absolute wrecking ball. He's a world-class Brazilian jiu-jitsu player himself. He's 9 years younger than Demian Maia, and even though he's a little bit smaller, I think he's got a much more well-rounded skill set. As long as he can keep this thing standing, he's going to have a massive striking and power advantage. And on the mat, he's, like I said, a world-class Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. So even though Maia is next level, he's taking on a guy that's got arguably comparable credentials and is 9 years younger than him, and he's got a modern-day mixed martial arts wrestling base mixed in there. I think Gilbert Burns is going to be able to keep this thing safe if it does hit the ground. And better yet, I'm hoping it doesn't hit the ground at all, and he just picks Maia apart on the feet for 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, Clint, that's kind of a fascinating breakdown in terms of them both being kind of Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners, also both being from Brazil with no home field advantage there. So kind of a lot going on. And guys, just a reminder here, we got Clint on. Follow him on Twitter. He's got a weekly podcast here in the UFC, Die Hard MMA Pod. It will be in the listing here on the YouTube channel. And remember to click the like button if you're liking it. Also, feel free to reach out on Twitter at Drew Martin Bets or at Die Hard MMA Pod, and let us know any questions, any comments for the noon Pacific Saturday UFC Fight Night 170. Clint, we got the main card next, right?
So we've got one more prelim fight. It's going to close out the preliminary card. We've got Brandon Moreno taking on Jussier Formiga. This is a huge step up in competition for Brandon Moreno. And normally speaking, I actually like to fade fighters that are in that position. But in this particular spot, we're going to bet on the dog. He opened up at about plus 160, and this is a good reason to follow me on Twitter because I tweeted him out when he was at plus 160. That line has been smashed all the way down to about plus 140 or plus 135. Brandon Moreno is just on a rocket ship to the top of this division. 125 doesn't have a whole lot of contenders, so there's not a big pool of opponents. That's why he's getting Formiga here. And Formiga's basically been around forever. He's got to win over one of the two contenders for the title right now, and it's a big, big fight. Like most Brazilian fighters, Jussier Formiga has a sick Brazilian jiu-jitsu game, but Brandon Moreno is one of these tough, hard-nosed Mexican kids. He's got sick boxing hands, heavy volume, lots of speed, and he is a scramble master. If this fight hits the ground, he's one of the few people that I would say can go toe-to-toe with Jussier Formiga. He's going to be able to scramble out of any bad positions, keep himself safe, get back to his feet. And then once it's on the feet, he's just going to out-volume Formiga. And something to keep in mind for this particular fight is with the whole coronavirus situation, this is going to be an empty arena. There's no crowd. So if you've got the Brazilian hometown guy that lands one punch to his opponent's three, normally the crowd roaring can influence the judges, and there's quite a few robberies. That's not going to be happening here. It's just the judges, just the corners, just the fighters. So when you see a guy outlanding his opponent 3-1, you're most likely going to go ahead and score that for him. I think that favors us in this spot. I'm all over the dog here with Brandon Moreno.
Man, great breakdown there. And you bring up Formiga from Brazil, right?
Yes. I'm fading the Brazilians on the Brazilian card. It's not necessarily the best idea, but I like it this week.
In Clint, just a little background on that. The referees or the umpires here for UFC, are they going to be Brazilian when it's in Brazil, or is it like UFC based so they could be from all over the world? How does that exactly work?
So with MMA in general, not just the UFC, the referees are provided by the commissions. So whatever state, whatever country you're in, the commission will have connections, and they've got referees that come in. And that's why we see a lot of the same faces. You've got guys like Herb Dean, Dan Miragliotta. These guys, they show up all over the place. And if you go to like Bellator versus the UFC, you'll see the same referees because they all draw from the same pool. So none of them are employed by the UFC. None of them are employed by the country. They come through the commissions, and they've got to have certain credentials to be able to get in there. So normally speaking, if somebody messes up with it being a referee, it's normally human error. So like if a fight gets stopped early or something along those lines, they thought the guy was hurt, they thought the guy was rocked, they're trying to save him a couple of extra brain cells. It's not a fight fixing type of situation. The ones you got to worry about really are the judges. They can be influenced by the crowd. They can be swayed by the hometown. That's something that you see a lot in combat sports in general, boxing as well, not just MMA.
Yeah, no, great breakdown. And the fact that there's going to be no fans in the stands, so it's just going to be the fighters, I guess whoever they're bringing in their camp, and the referees, and I guess any personnel that have to be there to keep the show going. Outside of that, nobody else, no friends and family?
Exactly. It's a bare bones crew this week. They're just trying to get this thing on TV.
Can you think of, and this is, guys, we do have one more fight to break down, and then we'll do a recap of all the bets here from Clint at MMA, or excuse me, at Diehard MMA Pod on Twitter. Is there any other kind of handicapping angles that you're going to try to use here with no fans being at the stadium, or it's just using this to your advantage in fading the Brazilian?
So in general, for the next couple of weeks, without having fans, I think the hometown advantage is basically going to dry up and disappear for the next couple of weeks. You know, you go a couple of weeks back and there was a fight in Texas where there were some blatant robberies. Some guys in Texas that were the hometown boy that absolutely had no business winning their fights that took it home because of the judging. You know, Dana White always says, do not leave your fights in the hands of the judges because they can get it wrong sometimes. So you're always looking for a guy to finish. When you're going to bet on a UFC fighter, you want him to either be able to finish the fight before it gets to the judges' cards or get it done so dominantly that nobody can mess the decision up. You know, the other angle is always taking a shot on a live dog when they're at home and they've got that crowd backing them, especially in Brazil. What they always do is they chant, "Vu a morrer," which means you're going to die. And they yell that at the opposing fighter the entire time they're in there. Without that angle, I think there's going to be a lot more of an even playing field. I think the fighters coming in from out of town are going to stand a whole lot more of an opportunity of getting a fair shake on their fights. And that definitely skews things when it comes to a handicapping perspective.
Man, great stuff, Clint. Guys, this is UFC Fight Night 170 breakdown here of the fights from Clint. Follow on Twitter at Diehard MMA Pod. You can follow myself on Twitter at Drew Martin Betts. He's got his podcast going out Tuesdays each and every week, the weekly podcast, and tomorrow's card. And if you're listening on Saturday, it's an early start here, noon Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern on ESPN. That's the main ESPN there. They're bumping it up with it being pretty much the only show in town talking about UFC Fight Night 170. My favorite fight up next, Clint, Charles Oliveira versus Kevin Lee. Right now we're seeing minus 145. That's Kevin Lee. 2.5 with heavy juice towards the under. So at least the odds makers telling us this isn't going to go very, very long, most likely. But either way, we see Kevin Lee as the, I guess, decent sized favorite.
Absolutely. And they're spot on. Neither of these fighters have a tendency to go very long in their fights. And this is one of the best fights that's a non-championship fight the UFC could put together. These guys are both pure action, 100% adrenaline, foot on the gas every single fight they're in. Oliveira is the submission leader for the UFC. He's set that record, and he's currently riding a 6-fight win streak. You've got Kevin Lee, who's had a little bit of a spotty run recently. He's 2-3 in his last 5, but he's been fighting nothing but the absolute elite of the elite. And that's where I feel like this thing is going to give us a bit of an edge. So Oliveira, like I said, is on that 6-fight win streak, but he has not been fighting anywhere near the level of competition that Kevin Lee has. So Kevin Lee has sputtered a little bit, but again, it's been from the absolute elite from the division that he's in. Oliveira mostly fought his career at 145. This fight's happening at 155, and Kevin Lee is just going to be the bigger man. Oliveira might be taller. He's going to have the height and the reach advantage, but he's got one of those really slim builds. He's a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He goes for these offensive submissions and basically just overwhelms his opponent. And that works when you're fighting against a smaller guy. Kevin Lee doesn't look out of place up another weight class at 170. He made the cut down to 155, and actually it's worth noting he missed weight today. So he's 2.5 pounds over the weight limit for this fight, and they've gone ahead and agreed he's going to get fined a little bit, but the fight's going to continue. What that tells me is that he didn't dehydrate himself as much as he normally would, and he's going to have even more of a significant strength advantage than he would have otherwise had trying to cut all the way down to 155. So it might be a little bit of an unfair advantage, but when it comes to betting, I don't really care. I'm going to be all over Kevin Lee in this spot, Drew. I think he's got the style here to stifle everything that Charles Oliveira brings to the table.
Yeah, no, I love the breakdown, Clint. But when you say like it's because he didn't dehydrate enough to make the weight, what makes you say that? And obviously you know the sport better than I do, rather than him just not being mentally prepared and doing the right things along the way to make weight. Why are you using it kind of as a negative instead of a positive for more of the kind of amateur UFC bettor like myself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I've been following this sport for years, and that's one of the things. This kind of just comes with experience, I feel like. Kevin Lee is a guy I've watched very, very closely. I've made a lot of money fading him in this rough patch that he's gone through. I've bet against him several times and cashed in on it. He actually had his father figure in his life pass away very suddenly. And when that happened, his father figure was also his trainer, and he kind of lost himself. He thought he could be his own coach. He thought he could be his own trainer, and he really fell off the wagon. He didn't do a lot of things right. He wasn't improving. He wasn't learning. Since then, he's moved over to TriStar. Now, this is the #1 gym up in Canada. They brought us George St. Pierre. Even the casual fans will know who that is. And he has the greatest MMA minds around him now. So there is no better place on earth that he could be than a gym like TriStar. You know they're going to have him ready. You know they're going to have him in shape, mentally dialed in, with a perfect game plan to go for this fight. So I've got to feel like this is maybe just a mistake as far as him traveling at the wrong time, maybe being a little overzealous when it came to the weight cut. Those of us who don't do this on a daily basis, we don't really understand all the nuances that go in. They've got to diet perfectly for like 2 months. And then the weight cutting process, if anything with your body goes haywire, you miss. It just happens from time to time. And Kevin Lee is a guy that cuts a massive amount of weight to make 155. I think he might actually just have to move up a weight class to 170. It may simply be a case of him being too big to do it. So in this spot, the officials came in and they told Kevin Lee to stop cutting weight. Usually when you miss weight, they give you 1 or 2 more hours and you come back and weigh again to try and make that weight the second time. They cut it off. They said no more cutting weight. And I think that's probably due to the coronavirus. You don't want to have that weakened immune system. You don't want to be drained out. You don't want to go to the hospital. And because of that, he didn't make that second weight cutting effort that really is the killer as far as the draining on your body. So since he didn't have to make that second effort, he's just taking the fine and fighting. I feel like that's got to be a little bit of an advantage here.
In Clint, it's been a while since I've seen both of these guys fight. Charles Oliveira, I know, the Brazil or the jiu-jitsu practitioner type guy. He's going to try to submit him, correct?
Correct. His striking's come a long way, though. Oliveira's not a one-trick pony these days, unfortunately.
Okay, so is it purely a contrast of styles here, where Kevin Lee's kind of the type of guy that come after you and look to knock you out with punches, right?
Absolutely. So now the thing with Kevin Lee is it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the Barzola fight a little earlier in the evening. He's got a wrestling base and then transitioned into jiu-jitsu later on in life. So he's a short, stocky, powerful wrestler, and he's got really fast, hard hands. He's got a highlight reel knockout with a head kick in his last fight. So in my opinion, he's going to have the striking power advantage. Oliveira may have the striking finesse advantage, but he hasn't really knocked all that many people out. So if anybody's going to go to sleep on the feet, I think it would be Oliveira. And then kind of like we talked about before, the jiu-jitsu of Oliveira, I think, can just be stuffed and stifled by a strong, powerful wrestler like Kevin Lee. And if he's able to control him on the ground and nullify that submission game, my idea is that once Oliveira starts to gas out a little bit, Kevin Lee is just going to open up on it and win by TKO. I'm guessing second or third round. Oliveira has a history of breaking. I know he's on a 6-fight win streak right now, but before that 6-fight win streak, he was giving up basically every other fight. As soon as the fight gets a little intense, as soon as he runs into adversity and it doesn't go his way, he just kind of shells up and shuts down. So the last 6 fights have all been first or second round finishes where absolutely everything has gone perfect for him and gone his way. As soon as Kevin Lee makes this thing a tough, gritty fight, I think we see him wilt again.
Makes perfect sense, Clint. Man, great breakdowns overall. You mind kind of recapping all the bets here for all the watchers?
Absolutely. We're going to kick the night off with an under. We've got Macedo and Malecki under 2.5 at even money or at a slight dog line. We're just looking for someone to get finished there. We have got a parlay, Enrique Barzola with Gilbert Burns tied together. We're looking for the grapplers to do their thing. We've got Brandon Moreno, our big underdog, on the card, looking for him to step up and really cement himself as a contender at 125. And then on the main event, we're going to roll with the favorite. We're going to bet on Kevin Lee to just shut down Charles Oliveira and prove that he is still a contender in this division.
So Kevin Lee, if you had to pick one as in terms of a best bet, would you, or no, pretty much all of them the same?
You know, I like all of them mostly the same, but I think my 2 favorites are going to be the bet on Kevin Lee and then the parlay.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. Clint, follow him on Twitter at DieHard MMA Pod, weekly podcast every Tuesday night there on Twitter at DieHard MMA Pod. This is UFC Fight Night 170, Brazil, noon Pacific time on ESPN. Clint, did want to follow up with kind of more of a just kind of an overall question here about the UFC, man. Do you think they're making the right decision in going forward doing this UFC Fight Night 170?
You know, in my opinion, I think they are.
Okay.
You know, right now, everybody's absolutely dying for entertainment out there. The coronavirus is one of those things that, again, I'm no expert, I'm no doctor, so, you know, please don't skewer me for my opinion here. But it seems like it targets mostly people with, you know, weakened immune systems or the elderly. These are professional, high-level athletes. These aren't guys that we should expect to really take much of a beating from something like the coronavirus. And this isn't a team sport. They're going to be locked in a cage, just the 2 of them. They're going to be a decent arm's length from everybody else. There's not going to be a giant crowd. It's not a team of 12 or 11 people going at it. So I think it's okay. If there's a sport that can survive something like this, it's going to be MMA. And if they keep the, you know, inside these closed doors, not a ton of fans, not a ton of people all in each other's space and breathing on each other, we should be able to do this relatively safely. So I hope this goes off without a hitch, because if it does, they've got UFC events scheduled for the next couple of weeks, and we're going to need something to watch.
Absolutely. So the next Saturday and the following Saturday after that, UFC's scheduled to go, right?
That's right. We have got UFC Fight Night 171 next week, where Tyron Woodley takes on Leon Edwards. Mm-hmm. That is a great fight, potentially a number 1 contender type of fight, so lots on the line there. And then after that, we've got Francis Ngannou taking on Jairzinho Rozenstruik, which is the 2 hardest hitters on planet Earth stepping in a steel cage and seeing who falls over first. Both of these fights are absolutely incredible, and I can't wait for them. There's a 1-week hiatus after that, so we've got UFC for the next 2 weeks in a row, and then we'll be right back in the second week of April.
Cool, Clint. Yeah, I mean, as far as like big name fights, this is actually a lesser, a lesser type than the UFC's in the future with the names that you were just naming. So it's actually going to get bigger for the UFC if they can keep this going. And guys, if you're looking for UFC picks, we'll try to get Clint back on here on the channel. But make sure to check out his weekly podcast on Twitter at Diehard MMA Pod. So Clint, awesome stuff, man. Great breakdowns. You obviously know your stuff, did your research. So I'm excited to bet it personally because it's really the only game in town, man. So UFC is always fun. And any closing words here before we shut this down?
You know what? I just want to wish everybody good luck. I mean, we've got a whole bunch of people that are going to be brand new to the sport, brand new to MMA. And honestly, that's what I founded the Die Hard MMA podcast on, as I was trying to bring some eyes to the fastest growing sport in the world. And this is our spotlight, our moment to shine. So come hang out, subscribe to the podcast. And I just want to say thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, great stuff, Clint. Best of luck, man, and stay safe.
Thanks a lot. You too, Drew. Good luck, everybody.